For those of you who don't know me, my name is Teresa Frohock. I'm a library technical assistant here in the library, and it's been my pleasure to get for you some speakers who are authors who are from North Carolina who come in and talk about their books. This is K.D. Edwards. He's the author of The Last Son, which is the first book in his Tarot Sequence series. The next novel, The Hanged Man, is due to be published in January of 2019. K.D. has spent time in Massachusetts, Maine, Colorado, New Hampshire, Montana, and Washington, where he likes to jest that the common theme until North Carolina was snow, so much snow. Currently, K.D. makes his home in Chapel Hill, where he works in higher education. He's going to speak to us today about his books and tell us how he researches and creates his monsters for his series. Please help me welcome K.D. Edwards.
So, I don't do too many of these, actually. I've only been published since last June, but I'm willing to be flexible to see what you guys might want to get out of the next hour. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'll tell you a little bit about my series. I do have a couple of websites I can bring up on the screen if we're going to talk about how I go about creating monsters, which seem to fit in with the Halloween theme. But if it turns out there's more interest in talking about the writing process or getting published or anything to do with science fiction, I'm happy to move in that direction as well. Hi. I go under the pen name K.D. Edwards, but my name is Keith. You're more than welcome to call me that. I've been writing pretty much my entire life. For those people who've always dreamed of being an author, I think that's a common theme, that you've wanted to be a writer since the day you even first read your first picture book. And my career path had gone in a different direction. I actually work in the UNC system right now. I work with the system office, so all 17 campuses in the state of North Carolina are my clients, essentially. And I'm very happy with that job, and I always have been happy with the career path I took in both human resources and higher education, but I always wanted to be a writer. And about 7 years ago, I realized that it was time. I was old enough, I was established, I had a good paycheck, there was no excuse not to take some of the manuscripts I had sitting in a drawer next to my desk and do something with it. By that point, I made a decision to join a writer group, and if we do end up talking about how to become a published writer, that's the first thing I'm going to tell you guys. Find some colleagues, find a writing group, find some peers that you can get constant feedback, and even more importantly, that you're trained to give feedback to other people, because that's how you become a better writer. So I had this amazing writing group, and there are 3 of us by now who are published writers. Who here reads young adult fiction? Anyone read the Nixia Triad? It's another published writer. He's a North Carolina writer. His name is Scott, but yeah, he's one of the members of my group. But so based on the support I got for them, I have literally 3 full manuscripts sitting in my desk that will never see the light of day. You will never, ever, ever read those manuscripts. But it gave me the tools I need to write the story I've been wanting to write my whole life, which is the, well, for years I called it the tarot accounts, but one of the things you'll learn if you ever get published is your author or your agent and your publishing house has a lot to say in what the final name of the book is going to be and the final name of the series. And they were worried that tarot account sounded a little bit too accounting-like, so they wanted to switch it to the tarot sequence. So I have a series called the Tarot Sequence, which is loosely based around, who here knows what tarot decks are? So sort of the mystical equivalent of playing cards. And a lot of people use them as a tool to, not so much fortune telling, but to really kind of examine your feelings. And the way the cards laid out kind of leads you sometimes to conclusions about what's going on in your life. And the tarot deck is centered around 4 different suits, but it also has what's called, or I guess you would call them their face cards, are called the major arcana. And there are 22 of them, I believe, and that's something I should really know off the top of my head. And they're all based around archetypes, such as the sun, the moon, the hanged man, the wheel of fortune, the world. And I kind of took that theme and applied it to reimagining a modern day Atlantis. What if Atlantis had always existed? It had always been right underneath our nose, but instead of focusing on having Atlantis remain a hidden community, or focusing on what happens when the world found out about it, I skipped 3 decades ahead of that moment in the 1960s when Atlantis was revealed and what happened in the aftermath of that. And then I focus on characters who live in the city of New Atlantis, which is where they all relocated as refugees when Atlantis was destroyed, because the moment they came out, there was a war between them and humans. Everything I write is all science fiction. Science fiction fantasy. It's been, I think that when I was younger, I focused more on contemporary fiction. The older I got, the more I realized that I get enough of that reading the news every day. It's kind of nice to be able to escape into something which is literally nothing but pure speculative fiction. Something with, dragons and clockwork soldiers. So creating a novel was set in a completely fantasy-like city called New Atlantis, which is a city that's compiled from ruins across the human world. It gave me the ability to essentially create my own mythologies, my own structures, my own heroes, and that's kind of the background of the story. What would you guys be most interested in hearing about? You're my captive audience for like the next 45 minutes. What really interests you the most if you could get anything out of today? How many people here want to be a writer? Okay. How many people read science fiction? That's better. Okay. What would you guys be most interested in hearing about? So the things that I'm really comfortable talking about, certainly I'm comfortable talking about my series, and I'm happy to even read parts of it to you, including some of the deleted parts, which are what, when you talk with writers, there's, the best writers always have 3 times more material than you ever read in a book. When they create a world, even right now, I'm working on the last 2 chapters of my second book, and the average book is about 100,000 words long, right? So when I started writing my novel, I had an outline of 40,000 words, just an outline, just literally bare bones notes. And it's the amount of detail that a lot of writers put into what they create. They need to understand the world better than the reader so that you don't need to read all those details. It kind of helps us flesh it out. So I have some deleted scenes which I needed to do in the beginning of my novel to establish the world in my head. I can also talk about the publishing process, because I've gone through that, and also what it's like to publish a second novel right after the first, which is in many ways more of a frustrating experience than the first, because a lot of people will spend years writing their first novel before they sell it. But once they sell it, suddenly the clock starts ticking for the follow-up. So what could have taken 2 years to write the first time, now you're suddenly doing in about 7 months. I can talk about some of the research I do and how I brainstorm ruins to put in my novel, rehabilitated ruins or monsters. What would you guys be interested in?
Probably research.
Okay, I can do that. What else?
How you create all of your characters.
I can talk about that. I will actually talk about that next. What? Okay. Oh, I could talk about that. And that'll be tied into the characters, too. Because there are some things I want to tell you about my novel. Anything else? Okay. Well, let's talk about that. So what are the things that make my novel stand out? And one of the things I'll tell you about the joys of being published that I would have never guessed in advance are the readers. Like, you think that you publish something and you're going to read what readers think about it. They're going to publish feedback on Amazon or on Goodreads. Sometimes they might even reach out with a letter to you, but what I didn't understand is that if you write something that really affects people, that really touches a chord within them, I get artwork from readers who create artwork based upon what they think my characters look like. I get playlists, like mixtapes from readers who say that these are the 10 songs that remind me the most about the novel. I get, you have no idea what it's like when you touch people in such a way that they reach out to you and say that they're on the 4th time reading your novel. My novel came out in June. People are saying that they've read it 4 times. I haven't read my novel 4 times. So it's the thing I think that really hit a chord with readers are my characters. I have a lot to learn about plot and development and storylines. Everyone does as a writer. But one of the things that I've always invested the most time into, I've got to like the characters. The characters have to have like a human connection with each other. They've got to be funny. There's got to be humor. There's got to be moments of genuine drama and tension, but also moments that are incredibly lighthearted. And I think I pulled that off. That's the one thing I hear the most from people, that my two characters, Rune and Brand, they just love. That, like when I get artwork from people, it's about Rune and Brand. When I get playlists, it's about songs inspired by the characters Rune and Brand. So that's one thing that I had wanted to set aside my novel. The other thing is that I wanted to create a novel where the main character, the city of New Atlantis doesn't identify as gay or straight at all. You will not see the words gay or straight appear anywhere in the novel, but however, the society I wanted to be more fluid. I wanted largely to be essentially a bisexual society, but I wanted to do it in such a way that no one would ever say this is a gay science fiction novel. I wanted people at most to say this is a novel that just happens to have characters who are gay. I wanted it to be completely incidental to the plot, but in such a way that the non-traditional reader can see more characters that remind them of themselves. And that's the other feedback I've gotten from people, which has been amazing. That people who normally look for characters that think and act more like them, they're able to find that in the novel. Characters who have no exposure to something like that don't feel that the novel is about that issue or that I'm trying to preach to them. It's just something that they've never read before. It's a different element of it. That's something that sets my novel aside too. Most people aren't used to, generally when you see characters, like especially main characters who might be gay or bisexual, it tends to be more of a marginalized niche audience. If you go on Amazon, there's gay science fiction, and it's off to one side here. I wanted my novel to be with the rest of the urban fantasies, and again, just have characters who happen to be, gay or straight, and that's worked out very well for me. Character development. How do I create the characters? I think for me, since I've been writing my entire life, I have archetypes in my head, much the way that the novel is set around fantasy archetypes of the tarot deck. You know, you have your courts that are dedicated to the sun, to judgment, to death, to the stars, to randomness, to the wheel of fortune. Much the same way that the courts are set around archetypes, my characters are set around archetypes. I have one character he's the smart-ass comedian. I have one character who is the noble hero. I have one character who is the young goofball. And that's always worked for me most of all. And there were times when I was developing the characters in the beginning of the novel that I would do nothing but imagine scenes. And they would never go into my story. I would literally imagine Rune and Brand going and shopping on Black Friday. And what experience would they have at a shopping mall? And I would write a scene around that, which actually is going to come in very handy in the near future because I've been asked to do something like that for a website. And I think the best compliment I ever got saying that people would be happy to read my two main characters doing nothing but reciting tax code. That's when when someone said that to me, that's when I knew I kind of achieved what I set out to do, which are to create two characters where regardless of what the scene is about, regardless of what the plot's about, or where they are in the plot, just the way they interact makes you want to keep on reading. It makes you want to read more about the characters. And if I can't do that, I'm sunk because this is a series. I set out knowing exactly what I want to do for 9 novels. This is basically 3 trilogies. I know exactly what happens in the second novel, and the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, and ninth. I know the last scene. I know the plot of every novel. Before I set about, I told you this is a story I've been waiting to write. I waited until I was good enough to put something together. I have hundreds of thousands of words dedicated to nothing but knowing what's going to happen in this series. If I couldn't pull it off with the main characters, if I couldn't create characters that make people want to keep on turning the pages, there's no way I'm going to maintain a readership for the next 8 novels. I'm off to a good start so far, based upon the feedback I'm getting. It's enough of a good start that I got a 2-book contract, and I'm working on the second one right now. And when I'm done with that, we'll start working on the third. We wanted to talk about characters. What else had we said? Remind me. I literally am a week away from finishing my manuscript for novel 2, which was due last April. So I am literally made of nothing but caffeine and bad sleeping habits at this point. I literally have 7 days to finish my manuscript. So if my short-term memory seems a little bit shot, do me a favor and just prompt me. What were the other things I said we would talk about really quick?
Research and development.
So what I wanted to do is, I'll read one part to you. Now this is actually a deleted scene. It's the deleted prologue. It's the very first thing I wrote before I imagined the characters before I imagined the 9 novels. This is the very first thing I wrote to see if I could create a world in 2 pages that would interest me enough to want to write more to it. Oddly enough, my experience getting published has been wonderful. My agent Sarah Megabo, I turned in the novel. She saw the first 50 pages I turned into her on a Wednesday. On Friday, I got an email saying she wants to see the whole thing. And on Monday morning, I had a phone call from her saying, I want to represent you, sign you now, and I want to send your novel out this afternoon. There was no changes to it. She just took it and turned it around. My editor, same thing. She said, I got some line edits for you, and I want you to cut the prologue, and then it's good to go. So this was literally the only thing my editor asked to change. So it was kind of hard to drop it because I liked it, but at the same point, I went with her recommendation, which was that she didn't think, as like I said to you before, sometimes the prologue is what you need to do as a writer to understand your world, but it's not necessarily something the reader needs to know. But this kind of gives you an idea of the research I put into creating the world building. World building, when it comes to science fiction, is everything. Do you guys know what I mean by that? The phrase world building? It's how do you create it's not just as broad as like, what's the city it's set in, or it's everything. It's what are the people like in the city? What are the laws in the city? What's the weather patterns in the city? What do the buildings look like? What does the social structure look like? The world building is all the detail it takes to make you convinced that this is actually a place where by the time you're done reading it, you feel like you had visited it, that you feel like I actually drew you into this world. Okay. So this was my original, the very, very, very first thing I wrote for the tarot sequence. For my kind, the first sign our world was ending came on October 24, 1946. Over the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico, a V-2 rocket shot 65 miles into space to take the first ever grainy black and white photo of the curvature of the Earth. As humans celebrated their milestone, my people brooded over what it meant. We watched with mounting unease as satellites and rockets were invented and launched, greedily capturing images of the planet's continents and waters. The turning point, the final failure of our magics and illusions, came when Yuri Gagarin, I'm awful with pronouncing names, but this is actually a Russian cosmonaut. Yuri Gagarin, a Russian cosmonaut, circled the Earth in Vostok 1. From that unimaginable distance, his human eyes succeeded in doing what so many others had not. They pierced our veils. There's reputedly a sound recording of Gagarin asking someone at Russian ground control to run and get a goddamn atlas. What he saw was an enormous North Atlantic island, more or less on the same latitude as Massachusetts and Maine, about the size of Japan, maybe a little smaller than the state of California. What he saw was Atlantis. So the gig was up, and Atlanteans knew it. My people decided to put on their finest, drop their spells that had kept the homeland hidden for millennia, and reveal themselves to the world. Have you seen the newscasts? Have you read about the riots? Have you watched the footage of the crowded churches and highways? The existence of Atlantis changed humanity's perception of everything. We'd been the root of so much myth and legend. Forget about Zeus and Odin and Shiva. We were the tricksters and the thunder gods, the fertility deities and the battle crows, the sorcerers and the shapeshifters. We were the fae and vampires, the werewolves, the undead. Human had even pinched the names of our leaders and repackaged them into the mystical equivalent of playing cards. There really was a Hierophant and a fool, a devil, and the Wheel of Fortune, temperance and justice. They are collectively called arcana, 22 ancient men and women, each with the power of nations. So humanity beheld our freakishness in all its glory and decided the most sensible course of action was to destroy us. The Atlantean World War was brief, the cost was high. Magically radioactive wastes in the Pacific Northwest and half of Poland, the near extinction of dragonkind, and a viral plague that decimated the Atlantean homeland. 100,000 headstones, trillions in damage, and at the end, both parties sat down and signed a peace accord. Flash forward to the late 1960s. By then, the last of the Atlantean race had gathered as refugees on an island off the Massachusetts coast, where they'd been steadily and secretly buying land since the 1940s. The settlement of Nantucket, privately called the Unsettlement, would last 3 decades. In displays of magic unprecedented before or since, the arcana came together to translocate abandoned human buildings from different parts of the human world. Virtually overnight, they created a patchwork Gotham of brilliant, dense, staggering architecture. This vertical sprawl has become known as the city of New Atlantis. Now, in the modern era, New Atlantis has settled its bones. It has become a world-class city with a world-class economy, powered by the talent and savvy of long-lived beings. My name is Arun St. John. I am, before anything else, a survivor of a fallen house, of a brutal assault, of violent allies and complacent enemies, of life among a people who turned their back on me decades ago. Among those who matter, I am known and notorious. I am the Day Prince. I am the Prince of Ruin. I am the last scion of my dead father's dead court, once called the Sun Throne, brightest of all arcana, now just so much ash and rubble. And these are my accounts. So those were the first 2 pages I wrote. And this is what convinced me that it's a world that I was interested in spending time in, and hopefully could turn into something that other people would be interested in reading about as well. To do it now, a lot of people will tell you with science fiction that it's, since it's all created in your head, it's all fantasy, it's all fiction, that there really isn't much research that needs to go into it. That's absolutely not true. Any good science fiction story is loaded with research. I can't even begin to tell you the stacks of books I have in my home. I have a stack this high on nothing but martial arts move. I've got about 2 pages of website addresses on ruins scattered across the planet, because New Atlantis is built from taking ruins across the planet and kind of teleporting them onto the island of Nantucket. I have a 2-chapter arc in novel 2, which is set on a World War II battleship. So I spent a year researching battleships, going down to North Carolina, to Wilmington, and seeing the USS North Carolina. The amount of research you put, if you do it well, no one will ever suspect you did research. It'll look like it was the easiest thing in the world to write, but trust me, it's not. Research is at the heart of everything I do. It's why I'll have a 40,000-word outline for a 100,000-word novel. Some of the web links I have, which I can show you later, are 3 websites which are nothing but monster databases, which if you think of monster databases, you might think it's actual simple. It's not. In fact, here, I'll even show you how complicated it can get. And some of these websites they'll give you that idea by just look at the way that you can slice and dice the website. Small creatures, medium creatures, large creatures. Are they more focused on undead, demons, elementals? Are they focused on a particular mythology or pantheon, such as the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Norse? Some of them will talk more about I don't have a computer like this, so I'm having trouble figuring out how to scroll up and down. There we go. You'll have that talk about different elemental powers. Are these creatures associated with fire or earth or water? Are these creatures that live underground? Can they fly? Are they from deserts or savannas or lakes and rivers? You have no idea how much is out there. I think of every culture that's existed since the dawn of time has their own full pantheon of myths and legends and monsters. There's such a wealth of thing out there. The trick as an author is to take what's out there and somehow put a twist on it so that it's yours. In the first part of novel 2, I have this sequence. I'll even describe it. Before I got within 20 yards of the mansion, Warren saw a daytime haunt, a physical shuffling creature. It staggered around the frame of a greenhouse. I moved a finger over my gold ring and waited. If it sensed me, it was indifferent. It was a rare type of skeleton. The proper name escaped me. It was formed from the bones of mass murder victims from noble houses. It walked in an unending loop, passing by all the places its component parts had died. I saw the ribcage of a child, the hip bone of a woman, the rawhide skull of what may have been a large man. And then Rowan remembers the name of the monster is a Goro, G-O-R-Y-O. That's an actual monster that I had pulled from one of the databases. I knew that this was going to take place on a haunted ruin of an estate. where nobles had lived. I looked and tried to find if somewhere out there in all these, you know, hundreds of mythologies, the ghosts of nobles. And I stumbled on the name of this type of monster. And then what I did is I took that concept and then built it a little bit further and decided it wasn't just the ghost of a single murdered noble house victim, but it was a composite of the different parts, almost like a shuffling zombie type creature. That's what you do in research if you want to really put your own mark on something that's already out there with a fresh take, because every story has already been told. I mean, every story in one way or another is a rehash of something that's existed in someone else's writing, something that's existed in the world, something that's been ripped from the headlines. But a way to interpret that in a fresh way to capture the interest of people is one of the best things you can strive to do as a writer. What other things did we say we were going to talk about? So when it comes to writing, you're going to hear there are kind of two different buckets that people fall into, and they call it either a pantser or a planner. A pantser is someone who feels they get hamstringed by outlines, and all they want to do is sit in front of a blank page with a general idea of where the story wants to go and take the story from that direction. A planner is someone who needs an outline as a safety net underneath them, who wants to fill that outline with all the research they've done. I'll explain exactly what that is, because I am a planner. I'm a consummate planner. I'm the planner who has an outline, just a bare bones outline, which is half the length of what the novel is going to be. And it's filled with everything from what are the weather patterns that are going to exist through the novel? What are some of the one-liner jokes the characters are going to tell? Does anyone sneeze through the novel? I just filled with the smallest minutiae of detail. And I call those my scene notes. So whenever I sit down, and I take all the brainstorming notes I have for the next scene that's in front of me, and I create almost like a movie script. I take them all and I organize them from start to finish of how the scene is going to be set. I actually call it, in some cases, like choreography, stage acting, where the character is going to be standing in my imagination, and then going from point A all the way to point Z, describing the high points of the conversation, the elements I need to talk about, which lead towards plot consistency. I do like, because one of the hallmarks I think of my writing is the humor between the two main characters, and humor hits you everywhere you are. Like, how many times have you been in the conversation with a friend and they say something just absolutely hilarious and just out of the blue? And that's when, you know, I'll bring a notepad or a digital recorder or my laptop with me wherever I go, so whenever anything occurs to me that might be something that Bran says, he's my smart-ass character, I jot it down immediately. And because I know that I have 9 novels ahead of me and I know what's going to happen in each of the 9 novels, I usually know where the best point for that joke is going to be. Whether it's going to be during my novel, which is about, and one of the ways I can kind of separate these in my head is every novel has a main theme. One is the national catastrophe, a storm. Another, zombies. I have another which is political and court intrigue. I have another which is like a Lost-like storyline where they're stranded somewhere. And so since I kind of have those big, huge, general plots for every novel, I can always tell where a good joke is going to go. And those brainstorming notes for me, I know some people feel that they have a tough time being inspired to write when they already have so much written down about what they want to do. I am a complete planner. For me, it's like I can still walk on a tightrope and get excited about walking on the tightrope, but I know I've got a huge safety net underneath me. I know that I don't suffer writer's block because, you know, 40% of what I want to write is already developed. What questions do you guys have so far?
When you've got all your books produced, you thinking about turning into a movie?
Every writer wants that. I will say this. I have my first phone call with Hollywood on Friday. Every writer would be interested in wondering what would happen if what they produced turns into a movie or a TV series. And when I'm a very, what I call my writing episodic. Like, I almost don't even think of my chapters as chapters. I think of them as episodes, episode 1, episode 2. I think in Games of Thrones terms. I think of what would it look like on screen. That's why when I even call my scenes scene notes, because in my head it really is like a television script. I think of what would it be like to see this on a small or a big screen. Not all writers are like that. Some writers, what they're doing is really not conducive to being translated to a visual medium. Mine is. It's absolutely geared towards that. And so when I first got my agent, one of the things sometimes that happens is your agent sees if there's any potential interest in, say, the Hollywood market. And then all of a sudden, someone does bite. And an agent from a Hollywood agency says, yes, I am going to subcontract underneath your agent, so now you have a Hollywood agent as well. And then the difference between Hollywood and the New York publishing houses, in publishing, it takes so long to get the attention of someone. Well, for the most part it does. I was really lucky because I had a couple of contacts, and those contacts paved the way for getting an agent really quickly and getting a deal really quickly. But for most people, I mean, you spend years trying to figure out what you want to write and getting the interest of an agent. So what you hear constantly is no, 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 and then finally you hear yes. Hollywood, completely the different. You hear yes, 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 I love it, and then you hear no. So you never get your hopes up on something like that. It would be really interesting, but yes, I do have a Hollywood agent, and I do have a producer and a screenwriter out there who are looking at my book right now. And I'm going to be talking with them on Friday, and I have no idea what to expect. I have no idea if they're going to read my novel and say, I absolutely love the characters, what a great relationship between Brune and Adam, but hey, can you turn Adam into Jane? I don't know what I'm going to say about that. I don't know what if they want to change it around so that, you know, this balance I tried to create between gay, straight, and bisexual characters is completely turned into something more mainstream. You know, is this something they're thinking about developing for PBS or NBC, or is this something they're thinking about maybe putting into Netflix or HBO, you know, more edgier and grittier? My novel is not PG rated. One of the characters, Brando, I think is my funniest character. He swears. There's pretty much not a single line of dialogue where he doesn't drop an F-bomb, which gets to the point where when you first read it, it's distracting, and then you can literally not imagine Brand saying a single line of dialogue without dropping the F-bomb. That wouldn't work really well on ABC, so I'm not sure what to expect for that. But yeah, I think every writer kind of wonders, what would it be like? I don't think I'd ever want what I wrote to be turned into a movie, but man, there's some awesome television series out there. Who's watching Daredevil? Daredevil, like, yeah, Daredevil season 3 is out right now, and my God, that is an amazing show. That is a breathtaking, the way they film some of their fight sequences, which is nothing but like 11 minutes of a single camera shot of a fight sequence. Yeah, I can see myself liking something like that. What other questions do you guys have?
Will there be a prequel?
I don't like prequels. You know, I know Game of Thrones, they're doing a lot of prequel series. A lot of writers eventually go back and they look at, the only thing I'm thinking about doing, has anyone ever read a book does anyone who John Scalzi is? He's a science fiction writer. He's really well known, and he's also a really good commenter. And he has like a really good website, and he's well known as a social figure, not just as a writer, but he did a novel called Locked In. And the whole point of Locked In was it imagined that there was a disease that affected the entire human population, and about 1% of the human population became comatose. I mean, literally locked into their body. And they didn't realize at first, but people were aware of what was going on. They were completely aware, completely sentient and conscious. It's just that they were completely paralyzed in their body. And they developed a way of creating almost like robot avatars where you could download your consciousness into the robots and live again. And what he did, I thought was absolutely brilliant, and I think this is the one prequel type thing I might do, is that for free, he created a 60-page short story which he imagined as a documentary that talked about how because the novel starts well after they've created these robot avatars, and it's more of a mystery series, but he created a 60-page short story of what were the first days like? Who was the first person affected with this disease? How did they realize that people were locked in? You know, how did they even think of funding something so phenomenal as creating these robot avatars? And it was one of the best things I've ever read, and it was free. It was like a good 60-page short story. I could see myself doing something like that. I have a good job right now, and I make a good paycheck, so I'm not really one of those writers. I'm perfectly willing to do a lot of free stuff, which is why for the holiday season I committed to 2 holiday stories with my characters. One that's going to be published on a website with other people doing Thanksgiving-themed short stories with their characters, and another which is just a mystery story with 2 of my secondary characters. And I'll post them all for free on my website and on my Twitter account as well. But that's the closest I've ever come. I've never really been, I think it's because I always want to know what's going to happen next. And I don't know how I'd get interested in a story that's so far back that you know everything that happens next because it's a prequel. It's a good question, though. Yeah, so I think I would want to do like that story that talks about like what happened on those days when, you know, Atlantis was discovered, and how crazy did it get? And Rune, this takes place when he's, you know, he's grown right now, he's matured, but the whole thing about Rune is he's a survivor of a vicious attack when he was younger, and that night and what happened on that night and what led to the fall of his throne. So he's the prince of a fallen throne as the story progresses. Sometimes I do think about, am I ever going to go back and talk about that? It's a good question. What other questions you guys have?
How much does it cost to like write a book and get it published?
It shouldn't cost, well, it's a difficult question. If you ever go to an agent and they ask your money to help market your book and publish it, don't ever do that. That's not good. That's not, a good agent doesn't charge you money. They make money when they sell your book. That's really important because there are a lot of unscrupulous people out there who will convince you that by giving money, you'll increase your chances of getting published. That's a scam. However, I think a lot of writers will tell you, you know, 50 years ago, sure, you write a book and that's your life. I mean, you make a really good paycheck and that's your job. It doesn't really exist that way anymore. A lot of people do this for love of the genre and the profession now. You don't necessarily become rich off it. So a lot of writers will take the money they earn from selling their novel and put it back into things like promotional materials, or they put it into visiting conferences and go and meet other writers and connect with more fans. My series, I mean, everything I made on the first novel really went towards writing retreats and the promotional materials, and I'm a series writer, so I'm building a following. I didn't expect to knock something out of the ballpark on the first novel and it become, you know, a known author. I'm hoping to build a series so that by the time I have 2 or 3 books out, I really start building a larger following. It's a good question though, but it really depends on the writer, but a lot of writers will tell you they invest a lot of their own money in their own marketing and their own publicity. But if you try to sell a book and an agent says you need to pay up front, be very careful about that. When you sell a book too, it might be different. My experience is limited to just what I know right now, but there's something called an advance and something called royalties. Now, an advance is you sell a book and they give you an advance. So great, hey, they give you $10,000 advance. They're not just giving you $10,000. What they're doing is saying, we're going to give you $10,000 against what we think your book is going to sell. So then you've got to work off that money, and that's called the royalties. Once you pay back the advance, or the advance say that my book makes over $10,000, then I get a percentage of that after the $10,000, and those are royalties. And with the series, I'm really hoping to build the readership and create a library of novels, like, you know, to have my more than one book on the shelf. And I have other series I want to write too. This is just my first one. I'm interested in young adult series. I've started reading middle grade books because it's been a crazy year in our country, and it's been a crazy 2 years in our country. And every now and then I like retreating to novels which kind of take me away from what's going on in the world altogether, what's going on in the country altogether. And middle grade novels are just something so pure. You know, it's something that where you're really trying to create a love of writing and reading in really little tiny humans. And there's something about that I really like, and I really want to spend some time on. What other questions do you guys have?
Talk to us about maintaining conflict in your novel. I see a lot of new writers who think they can just kind of tell a long story without having to move from conflict to conflict.
Yeah, the conflict drives a novel. You'll hear that word. That's like one of the most basic tenets of writing. You've got to have conflict. If you don't have conflict, it doesn't matter how good your storyline is, your plot. It doesn't matter how good your characters are. Conflict creates a catalyst for change and development, and it creates development arcs for your characters, and it makes them more interesting. It makes them evolve. It makes them change. No one wants to read the same novel. I mean, Harry Potter went from the first Harry Potter novel. That's a great example of how conflict develops the series, because you know, J.K. Rowling took it from essentially what was a middle grade novel for the first novel, and by the end of it, I mean, it's pretty much adult, if not strong, new adult fiction. You know, her characters developed and they grew, and you grew with them as readers. because I put so much work into planning my series, and I know where I am now, one of the things about Rune is that, and this is one of the biggest conflicts I have of Rune, not just Rune's conflict with the other characters, but Rune's conflict with the reader, is that he's what's called an unreliable narrator. Does anybody know what that means? What does it mean?
Whatever they say may not be what actually happened.
Yes. What were you going to say?
You can't trust them to tell their own story.
Yes. Now, he's just a touch of an unreliable narrator. With the one difference is he's very scrupulous about what he says. He doesn't lie, but man, he avoids certain topics because the night that his court fell, something happened. And it's indicated to the reader that he's not being perfectly honest about how much he knows. So I have this 9-book series. The first 3 books are all about the reader finding out how Rune is an unreliable narrator. What is he keeping from you? Not just the other characters. What is he keeping from you, the readers? The next 3 novels are about Rune finding out what's being kept from him, the larger mystery. And then the final 3 novels are all what I call my end game. But the conflict is, again, I tried to come up with conflict. What I like the most is it's not just a conflict with Rune and his best friend / bodyguard Brand, or the characters he meets over the course of the novel. It's the conflict with you guys. It's the conflict with the audience. And the development of that, because I know where I want to take the series, I plot development arcs. Every novel I start, I look at like my, say, 5 main characters, and I think, well, how are they going to change? How are they interacting with each other? How did they develop? How did they become a more interesting person? Do they have a voice in this novel, or are they completely, background artwork and there's no change? I think that's one of the most important parts of developing something that kind of stands the test of time, something that constantly engages readers and helps you build a bigger audience as your series goes on. What other questions do you guys have?
Will your moral compass be tested throughout the book?
Oh. Will his moral compass be tested? So Rune is I don't want to. The word anti-hero gets bandied about a lot, and it's sort of a yes. But the problem is that his moral compass is different from other people. And one of the first things, for instance, he's more like he's not a Superman. He's a Batman. He's willing to do things that other people would consider extreme, but in the end, he has a goal that he thinks is right. He has, in some cases, he might defeat a monster, but he feels awful for the monster because the monster was just being a monster. So he has his own moral compass, but yes, his moral compass will be tested. It will be tested because he's keeping a secret from the reader, and there are going to be circumstances which start forcing that secret out. What will he do to maintain that secret? Will he break his own code to keep that a secret so people don't find out what happened the night his court fell? Or will he realize that revealing the truth will keep people from being hurt further? That's a really good question. I like that. I'm going to have to think about it. What other questions can you guys think of?
What is Rune and Brand specifically like? What monster are they? I mean, they're from Atlantis, but like, what are they?
Humanoid. They're like, so basically, just imagine like X-Men, like mutant humans, just like a different offshoot of humanity. And part of the reason that I can have such fun with these characters is because Brand is actually Brand is human. I take that back. Rune is Atlantean, Brand is human, and Brand is what's called Rune's companion with a capital C. And the concept is, and this is a very old concept in the history of Atlantis, that at birth, you would be bonded with a human infant, and that human infant would be raised to be your lifelong bodyguard or counselor or best friend, whatever it might be, your companion for your entire life. They would literally buy a human infant, stick it in your crib, do a magical spell that bonds you together so you have sort of light telepathic abilities between the two, and that would be someone who is going to be your shadow for your entire life. And the reason they picked a human is because humans can't do magic, so there was never any chance that humans would covet your magical items and abilities. And they would also complement you where the firepower to the brawn. So Rune and Brand, they are humanoid, but they're also bonded by this. It's a concept that has lost favor, the idea of companions, because it's such an investment. What happens if you bond these two people and it turns out that one of them grows up to be a bit of a dork? I mean, you just wasted a lifetime investment on something that might not work out, or maybe they turn out not to be a good fighter or not very smart. But it's also something where we're talking about conflict. Rune constantly grappling with the idea that this is Brand. I mean, Bran was put in his crib. His first memory is of Bran sticking a rattle in his eye. His memories of childhood always have this human being called Bran with him in it. Bran was bought and put in his crib, and Rune's struggling with what that means. I mean, did Bran have a choice? Am I just dragging him into danger? Did he want this? How would he have grown up if he wasn't sold to me? So that's a huge element of conflict that's coming out in novel 2, because in the very beginning, I open my novel with what I call an opening action sequence, which doesn't necessarily relate to the overall novel, but it's a good way to kick off my stories. And Rune he does these periodic treasure hunts on his court fell. His estate is haunted. Every now and then he does what he's called the treasure hunt. He goes into his haunted estate, tries to avoid all the monsters and find stuff, like hidden treasure, because no one else will go on the haunted estate. And in this one, he finds pictures of the file when Bran was sold to him. He finds pictures of Bran's older brothers. And the concept that Bran even had a human family blows Rune's mind, and he struggles the entire novel with whether to reveal that to Bran. It's a good question.
What made you go into so much detail, like going to the USS North Carolina?
As I was saying before, if you do your job well as a writer, it's going to look like I did no research. It's going to look like just natural. You'll never get credit for, I'll never get credit for a year of researching a battleship. It takes place over the course of 2 chapters. But for me, it was something amazing about, I had my laptop on the USS North Carolina battleship. I literally followed, because there were only 2 battleships of that class, but I imagine a third that became a ghost ship. There's a whole sequence in novel 2 where there's a red light district, but they're all made of ghost ships that are moored to a harbor, and one of them is a USS North Carolina battleship based off it. So I know he had there's this whole chapter with him going through the battleship and fighting off a ghost that's chasing them down, and seeing memories of how it became a ghost ship. And I'm literally there with my laptop going through and following him as he goes through the different scenes, and there was something kind of cool about that. It was more for me, I think, than anyone else. And I do say that, I have a writing group and I have beta readers, and that really, to the point where they said they're not sure I should have put that in the first third of the novel because it's so strong, they don't know how I can equal that with the rest of the novel. So it worked. The research I did worked. People really were drawn to what I created, and they felt that it was really visualized well. So, hopefully in the end, the research makes your writing better, but in a lot of cases, it's for me. I like doing it. I like doing the research. So there's something crazy also about, a lot of times when you publish a book, you have to wait a year before, say, the next one comes out. And in this case, at first, they wanted my second novel to come out 3 months after the first. We finally convinced them we needed to wait a little bit longer. So now it's coming out in January, and I'm still 3 chapters away from finishing it. So there's something literally crazy about knowing this afternoon I will write words that will be on a bookshelf in about the next 3 or 4 months. So hopefully all this research is paying off. If I didn't have an outline, there's no way I could do a deadline like this. What other questions do you guys have? You asked really good questions, by the way. One more question, come on. One more.
This is a really lame question, so I'm sorry, but between the 2 main characters, who's your favorite?
That's not a lame question at all. I like Brand. Brand he says the things that I would never, ever say. He says the things that, when, the person who brings 15 items into the 12 item or less checkout line, Brand is the person who will say something. Brand is the person who will come up with the perfect one-liner to make that person feel so small that they grab the stuff off the conveyor belt and walk back in the store. He's the person he's my noble voice. Brand is my, I'm going to tell it like it is voice. That's a really good question. I don't know if this happens with a lot of readers, but I've got a lot of people who really seem excited about my story. I told you that they've read it multiple times. They're sending me artwork about, well, I don't know if I could pull any up, but I can. Let's see, because they take sides, is what I'm saying. I have readers who feel very strongly that Rune and Brand can never get in a relationship, that they have to remain just platonic best friends. I have people who want to see these 2 characters, Quinn and Max, in a relationship. They have people who feel that Adam, the love interest of Rune, is a better character than Brand. They take sides. It's like that Twilight, Team Edward and Team Jacob. that happened years ago. I know that someone just sent some artwork on Max and Quinn, and my publisher, Pyre, retweeted it. That's me right there. I'm not going to figure out the scroll. Here. Someone randomly sent me this. Max and Quinn from The Last Son. Those are two of the main characters. And someone just did that and sent it to me. It just blows my mind that someone would care enough about my characters to do that. And everything on there is like based on the novel. Like, at one point I say that Quinn's breath smelled like grapes, so there's a grape soda can, and he buys iced coffee all the time, and there's a devil dog because he steals Rune's devil dogs. I mean, it's just filled with the lava lamp. Quinn gets it at the end of the novel. Just the fact that someone knows all those details and would put it in something like this, they have feelings on who's their favorite character. But I like Brand. He's out of all these brainstorming notes that I have, these 45,000 word outlines, 10% of everything is nothing but one-liners from the character Brand. So I think of one-liners whenever anyone cuts me off in traffic, in the grocery market, super, checkout line, people who talk in a movie theater. I literally think, what do I want to say to that person on the spot? Brand's going to say that in book number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever. Any other questions? It's been about 50 minutes. Any last questions? Yes. Amazon. It's like a normal book. So Barnes and Noble. Oh, hey. I have some. You can park everywhere, like Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Who would like one? I can't give them out to everyone, but you're getting one because you.